Moving into the content here, our district and school safety team. So you can see a simple diagram here. And again, it's represented well by the group in front of you. Our safety teams are cross-role teams that work to prepare for and respond to crises and emergencies when they happen. We have regular meetings regardless of what's happening in our schools and in the community to be prepared, to constantly improve our processes, and also just to build community among the responders and the folks who will work together in any situation. So it's a really important part of our structures. The Newton Public Schools District Safety Team, I'm the chair of that team, which is why I'm talking to you today, but it includes leadership from within our school district and schools, but also the wide range of folks that you see sitting before you, and representatives from each of these departments, and we meet regularly. And again, the key responsibilities, as I mentioned, updating our response protocols and preparing for any kind of emergency, ensuring that there's proper resources and expectations for training and practice, and then coordinating in the event of citywide crises or emergencies. Our school safety teams are analogous to that. They include our administrators at each school, as well as representatives of teachers, mental health professionals, administrative staff, and nurses who work closely under Health and Human Services at each of those schools. And again, similar work that they do there. They're responsible also for applying and adapting the district protocols that we have for any kind of emergency situation, and preparing to coordinate any events which would occur at the school level. And they also work closely with folks like Jordana and other members of our safety team in the event of a crisis, to receive support, to get feedback, and to make sure that they're thinking of every possible step in a crisis or an emergency. Our emergency operations plan is the foundation for all the work that we do in responding to any kind of emergency or crisis. Our emergency operations plan was updated in 2019, just before the start of the pandemic. It was important work that we engaged in as we do all this work in a collaborative process with the Newton Police Department, Fire Department, Health and Human Services, as well as the Newton Teachers Association and Educational Secretaries Association. We worked with nationally recognized outside consultants, Preparedness LLC, and we revised the existing operations plan at that time, and made some very specific improvements. Probably the most important one was adding a specific scenario for what would be called a hostile event scenario in our plan, commonly known as an active shooter scenario, to make sure that we're incorporating, unfortunately, the research and best practices that have been developed in this area through our country's experiences over the last 10 or more years. We also did a lot of additional updates to make the plan and the materials associated with more usable, more accessible through electronic means, and other updates that brought it up to date with best practices and legal requirements for school safety plans. So the key components of the plan, we'll talk more about most of these pieces, the 4 core responses that are foundational to all of our responses to specific scenarios. We've created student-friendly classroom procedures posters so that all of our classroom procedures are accessible to any member of the school community, visible in any classroom in the Newton Public Schools. Again, we continue to have the emergency operations plan with detailed responses for any scenario, and some of the other updates that I've just mentioned earlier. The plan also incorporates more up-to-date communication systems and different levels of communication that we'll talk about in a second as well. So the 4 key and core responses to our plan are evacuation, shelter in place, lockdown, and a hostile event response. And you can see there's a tagline that was created with the educators and the public safety folks involved in the planning process to make them easily understandable and memorable to any member of the school community. And each one is a core response to a different fundamental safety concern or emergency, including a fire, a threat outside the school, a threat inside the school, or an active shooter, another act of armed violence within the school. So each of these are a fundamental part of the training that our school leaders go through, and that there's awareness and understanding of on the part of anybody in the school. We practice each one of these core responses as a part of our drills, and spend a lot of time thinking about how to apply each one of these to more specific scenarios as well, as is indicated by the emergency operations plan. To give you a sense of what the more specific scenarios incorporated by the operations plan, just a snapshot of the table of contents. It's shown here on this slide, and it gives you a sense of both the some of the detail provided for those 4 key responses, core responses, as I was calling them, and more specific scenarios. And then what the poster that's familiar to everyone here, that's in each of our classrooms, that outlines the very clear and concise directions for any of the 4 scenarios listed at the top, the 4 core responses, as well as specific and common information that students, staff, and other community members need is here on this poster. We spent a lot of time and attention going over every word of this to make sure that it was accurate and clear, but also educationally sound and appropriate for students in K through 12 grades to have it on the wall next to them as they lined up to go to their next class or head out the door or come into the room. So we actually want this to be really accessible and visible within each classroom as a part of our safety plan. So here's just an example, spotlighting one particular section of this, one of the 4 core responses, the information that's claimed, that's shown here on the classroom plan. In addition to that, we have a wide range of safety materials, which are accessible to any member of the Newton Public Schools through a shared Google Drive. There's interactive electronic copies of each of the documents that I just showed you, but there are checklists and detailed guidance for specific scenarios that our school-based safety teams work through in preparing for, their communication templates, training resources, and age-appropriate scripts and talking points for talking about each of these scenarios and the drills we do with students from ages 4 through 23. And so we work closely with our mental health professionals, our psychologists, and other educators to create talking points for teachers as we do drills for anything from an evacuation drill, a fire drill as we know it, up through a hostile event scenario, and to understand why we do that without creating unnecessary trauma or concern for students, but being honest and direct about the need to be prepared for any kind of scenario. We do these drills regularly in schools for each of the 4 scenarios that we mentioned. The expectations are here. We coordinate those drills closely with each of the departments represented here to make sure that we're meeting the legal requirements, following the best practices, and also getting feedback on them in each school as we do them. Our school nurses also coordinate and drill with members of the school community, our medical emergency response team protocols as well. I actually was just talking with a principal today who had done a drill with their medical emergency response team, and then not 24 hours later had a student in the nurse's office who became unconscious, and they immediately applied the learnings from the drill 24 hours later. And we're just so thankful to have had that kind of immediate practice, and then also feedback and need for continuous feedback and improvement. So that's another one of our key components that we drill on. One of our new practices that we've developed in the last several years is safety days, where each school at the beginning of the school year practices all 4 core responses, one after another, so that staff and students are familiar with each one of them, but also the differences between them. It allows us to concentrate the feedback and support from our public safety partners on those days, and make sure that people understand the best practices, and then we get the feedback that we need and document our drills carefully that way as well. We've been working also carefully on making sure we document each of the drills that we're doing, sharing that data with our police and fire partners as well. Staff training occurs annually and at different levels. We have annual training for obviously all school staff. It focuses on the emergency operation plan as well as preparing students for the drills. We have annual training for our school leaders that we run as their key components of our emergency response plans, often making key decisions in the initial moments of any crisis to ensure the proper response and proper communication. And then I also do orientation for any new school leader in the Newton Public Schools every summer, whether they're new to being a principal or coming from another district, orienting them to our district and our materials, and the specific context of their schools is very important. So just a couple more topics that I'll touch on before we open up for question and answer. Security cameras, I know had a lot of questions about that and people were curious. We do have interior and exterior cameras in public areas at all of our middle and high schools. And per school committee policy and also the protocol developed to support that, cameras are not permitted in classroom areas, office areas, locker rooms, et cetera, to ensure privacy. There are some cameras available in high needs areas in some of our other school buildings as well. And there's a specific protocol that we follow. It's posted on our website as well about how to access and review the video records to protect individual privacy. The short version of that is we do not actively monitor security cameras. So we're not surveilling people and areas in any real time, but we can use those security cameras when a crime has occurred or when there's a specific concern or in the event of a crisis. So that's the short version of the protocol. There's a lot more detail there. Communication systems. This is crucial to our emergency response procedures. So we have a number of over-layering systems that allow us to communicate at the school level and that dovetail into the public safety communication systems. The school messenger system is our technology system that allows us to send messages by phone, email, and text to our staff, as well as our families and our students. And that includes multilingual options. It incorporates data from the student information system, and it's customizable. So if a family does want to opt out of any of those message systems, they can. We obviously have our internal walkie-talkie radio systems that allows for internal communication within our larger school buildings. We have hardwire radio connections that connect each school building to Newton Emergency Dispatch. You see a photo of what that looks like. There's one of those in each main office in all of our schools to be used in the event of a hostile event, an active shooter or similar act of violence. Each one of our front offices in our school is now being trained annually by the director of the dispatch center, Laura McGargle, who's done a terrific job with that. I've observed her trainings in a couple of our schools, and it's been super helpful. We're collaborating with the police on that. We have a 24-hour crisis phone for our school leaders and district staff to ensure that we're getting the right information to the right people. Jordana Lesperance, Dr. Lesperance is here as the holder of that phone and has received extensive training on crisis response and is incredibly helpful for all of us in that regard. Sound good? And our telephone systems in our school, I know a lot of questions about that. We have 911. We encourage all of our staff, all of our students to call 911 in any incidents, always a best practice. We have hardwire backups for our 911 phone calls over what's called copper line in all of our systems, even when our internet protocol phones are down. And then we, of course, have public address systems within our buildings, which are incredibly helpful in these emergency events as well. Big picture, the thing that we have to understand, and this image here is a image of multi-tiered systems of support, which is really familiar to our educators here and may be familiar to many of you, but it's the understanding that there are many layers or tiers of how we need to create safe schools. We're applying an educational principle here to school safety. We think it's a really helpful analogy. Focusing on the well-being and wellness and mental health of all of our community members is the most important thing that we do every day to make our schools safe. So that work is universal work. It's represented by the green triangle at the base of this form, but the things that we do to ensure that all of our community members are well, that they have strong connections to one another and to important resources in the community, that our schools are safe and welcoming, are the most important fundamental elements of safe school communities. In addition to that, we have targeted steps we also take that many might not think of as school safety typically, but including how do we address issues when they happen in our school, whether they be disciplinary, bullying, or discrimination, and what kind of support do we offer folks who are in need of more support or mental health or other support. Those additional steps that we take, represented by the yellow triangle, also help to ensure that we have safe schools and communities. And really that last red tier, the tier 3, the intensive, proactive, and reactive steps are what we typically talk about and what's part of this presentation, the majority of it, in terms of creating safe schools and responding to emergencies and crises. But again, safe schools start with those foundational elements, and reminding ourselves that is important as well. A couple last notes, a very specific initiative, and you heard a couple of our public commenters mentioning this. We're working closely with, and I know Superintendent Smith has worked closely with Chief Carmichael and also Ruth Oshino, Linda Walsh from Newton Health and Human Services on firearm safety outreach and education for our families and other community members. I think we're really lucky to have very strong firearm regulation and laws in place in the state, and I know working from experience, the Newton Police takes the application of those really seriously, are great partners in that. But we also want to work together with our partners to ensure that all our families have access to the education and resources they need to keep any firearms that they do have in their home safe. So working on outreach that will likely include social media, possible gun lock distribution, take back. And I don't want to speak for you, Chief, but I know these are all things on our list, as well as education on the red flag laws, the ERPA laws, and other legislative initiatives. So happy to answer questions about that. And then this year, just where are our focus areas? I always describe school safety as peeling the onion. There are always next steps and new layers to the work we need to do to make our schools safe. So we need something we're really focusing on this year in this pseudo post-COVID world that we live in, but really rebuilding the drill routines and familiarity that everybody has with our emergency operations plans and procedures, as the safety portions of our brain have moved on from some other public health concerns. And that's been really important and foundational to our work this fall and starting the school year. We'll keep doing that with school leaders, staff, and students. It's been great continuing to really coordinate closely with our police and fire partners on all the drills that we're doing, making sure we're crossing all our T's and dotting our I's and learning the lessons we need to from each set of drills as we do them. And then refining our communication systems, continuing to test and prepare the text systems, in particular with School Messenger. Again, I mentioned the training on our radio connection to the emergency dispatch, and that's been really an area of focus and great training we've received. And also looking at where we have cellular coverage, weak spots in our schools, and making sure we have backup communication systems in place that are all there that I mentioned to be able to ensure communication in any such situation. So those are some of our focus areas this year. We do have all of this information and similar information on our website. There's an easy link there. And I think at that, I will stop talking and let folks ask questions and have other people answer them besides me.